Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Crownsmen Show. I'm your host, Jared Downey. With me today is Gowdy Molina. How are you today?
I'm very good.
Good. You got enough monitors you're operating over there?
I think so. I say I think so, but I might require a couple more.
We've got a show, another one of these shows that I've wanted to do for a long time, to talk about the law side
Mhm.
of um, taking over companies, passing companies on, selling companies, all that fun stuff that we all look forward to having to inevitably do at some point. So we have Pratibha Sharma from Clark Wilson. She's a partner at Clark Wilson. She will be joining us today. Very excited to have her. I've known Pratibha for a couple years now, a few years, and so I'm excited to be able to actually have her on the show. First, Gowdy, who are the sponsors today?
Alrighty, so first up, we have Power Zone Equipment. When you need a specialized team of world class engineers for your oil and gas pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit powerzone.com. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with Power Zone. Visit them at powerzone.com. And of course, we have Savinaw Equipment. Savinaw Equipment supplies new and used mining equipment around the world, from placer to underground to ore processing plants. They have gold concentrating tables, trommels, and mineral jigs in stock now to take advantage of the high gold prices. Visit them at savinawequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. There we go. Sorry, I
You
totally forgot to
shutting me off
yeah,
now,
I
Gowdy?
totally I did. I want to take over the show.
Okay, good. I need to go somewhere. Oh, we can't travel right now.
No.
Anyway, um, Pratiba, very good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us and representing Clark Wilson. We're going to cover a lot today. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm very excited to be here and speak to all the issues that you already stated in your introduction.
Yeah, I mean, all of the stuff that I mentioned is stuff that I've seen or even somewhat been a part of. So I mean, we've had conversations offline of some of those examples. We're going to run into a little bit of a thing today because you obviously are representing clients. So most shows we can give very specific examples, which I'm guessing you're probably not allowed to do.
Yeah, I mostly work for privately owned businesses. So, confidentiality reasons prohibit me from naming clients. But we can go through some examples of situations that I've faced.
Okay, before we get into that, and I've got a kind of a list of different scenarios and things that I want to get into. I'm very excited about it, as you can tell. But I just want to who is Clark Wilson? Are they primarily do they deal with clients on the business side?
That's right. So we're a Vancouver-based, globally connected firm. We primarily deal with business clients, and whatever business legal needs our clients have. We have approximately just under 100 lawyers at the moment who practice in various areas, both on the solicitor side and litigation side. So we are Vancouver based, but we're globally connected in the way that we help our BC clients through our extensive network of resources outside of the BC jurisdiction to expand outside of BC and also internationally. And on the flip side, we help our international clients or clients outside of BC expand into the BC market, either through acquisitions or investments, or to just establish their business here.
I so wish I could ask you like very specific questions about companies.
Mhm.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Um, in 2020, obviously, we don't need to we don't need to go into everything about it, but I think globally we're all accepting that that was a bit of a crazy year.
That's
For a firm like yourself, is it a whole new workload coming off the heels of a year like that and going into 2021?
So definitely, there was a bit of an adjustment period early on in 2020 where businesses and our firm were reacting and responding to what was going on. and especially distancing measures. And so that resulted in a lot of different types of issues coming up for clients. And, as if I was to sum it up, I would say on the one hand, there were some unique challenges that resulted from what was going on around the world, and new issues. But on the other hand, the year really served to emphasize the very legal issues um, that we have been advising our clients on all along, that they should really be thinking about, not just when there is an unprecedented event, an unexpected occurrence, such as what we faced, but there could be any number of events that come out of the woodwork, and being prepared is really important. So, can't go into too many details in terms of client names, et cetera, but some of the new and unique issues and challenges that were coming up were a lot of initiatives and funding, and there's so much information out there. So our firm has created and continues to maintain a COVID-19 um, resource page, where you can find lots of articles and podcasts and interviews, and lots of legal issues are discussed. So I encourage people to look at that at our website, cwilson.com. In terms of issues, initially it was, how do we proceed with decision making, at a distance? So things like transitioning from in-person meetings to virtual meetings was a big thing. While complying with legislative requirements and the requirements of corporate constating documents, because there are specific rules around holding virtual meetings, and how they are to proceed, and what requirements need to be met, such as proper notice requirements, adequate ability for everybody who's participating to actually participate, ask questions, and state their points of view. So those types of issues came up. And for the most part, we were able to help our clients with electronic documents, so signing documents electronically, not necessarily putting pen to paper, with the exception of a few areas where that can't be done. So we navigated around those issues. And of course, workplace issues were front of mind for a lot of business owners, needing to address reduced business needs, office closures, et cetera. So remote working arrangements and all the ancillary issues that come along with it in terms of data protection and privacy. Privacy legislation requires businesses to properly, protect personal information that is in their possession. So policies around that, assisting clients with cybersecurity and technology-based policies. So those types of issues, were new for many businesses because they hadn't turned their minds to it. Another issue that came up was contractual performance. So some businesses ran into issues where they weren't able to meet their obligations, such as supplying goods and services, or importantly, making payments. And so there were a lot of discussions around whether those, in the face of everything that was happening, whether those contractual obligations actually continue, or can they be deferred, can they be postponed, suspended. So, generally speaking, if there's a written contract, it is the terms of the written contract that that governs the arrangement between the parties. So it was very important to review the contractual terms properly. But also there were some mechanisms by which we were able to negotiate alternate arrangements, and seek deferrals, and buy some time for our clients through mutual dialogue and negotiation. So those were some of the issues that businesses faced, and certainly disputes. Courts were closed for the most part, but for some essential and urgent hearings stipulated by the courts. So there were negotiations, there were alternative dispute resolution mechanisms like mediations and arbitrations, which still occurred. Those were some challenges and some new things that businesses hadn't turned their minds to before. But I think even more importantly, the year highlighted what we have been telling our clients they should be prepared for, and that is, plan early, have a succession plan in place, have an exit plan in place, because what happened last year is just one example of um, an event that was outside of our control, and business owners had to react to it. But there are other triggering events like the death of a business owner, or the departure of a key employee. These are also events that could lead to some serious issues for businesses. So, and have led to serious issues for businesses. So, um, you know, uh, last year's situation really made it clear that early planning, preparation, seeking early legal advice, and not just legal advice, tax, accounting advice, having evaluation for your business, knowing what your business is worth, having an idea, having a legal audit done of your business, knowing that you own the assets that you think you own.
Mhm.
You won't believe, there was a situation where the business intellectual property was, primarily the asset that a purchaser was interested in buying. And the business owner thought that the company owned that asset, but it was a contractor who had actually created that intellectual property and had not assigned it over to the business. So, it just came as a surprise to the business owner right before a transaction was about to close, because they had to make representations about owning that asset, and it caused delays. It caused several months of delays, and we were able to resolve that issue. But just getting your house in order, essentially, is what came out of last year for our business clients.
For you, going back to this, something you said right at the very beginning is the like legislative challenges where people actually need to be in person. Even actually, I want to take it back a step further. That as a law firm,
Mhm.
how big was the adjustment? Of course, this show we're primarily focusing on your clients, but from your perspective, how big of a challenge and of a pivot did you have to do as an organization and as lawyers to all of a sudden be accommodating this and even finding out what the rules really were, or lack thereof? Because I know there was a lot of gray area that happened in 2020. How did you? I mean, how did you approach it? Was it was it serve the client and then go home and try to get up to date on all these different things that are as they're coming out?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have just under 100 lawyers, so there are a lot of minds working, to address these issues and very quickly. And in terms of our, transition out of the office to a remote working arrangement, that happened within days, and in fact, it was quite seamless. I have to give a big shout out to our systems team and our management here for handling that so seamlessly. And our lawyers and staff members were working remotely, but we didn't really experience a disruption in the services that we were providing. Clients were able to reach us. Lots of meetings such as the one we're having right now, and phone calls, and we had regular town hall meetings within the firm as well, so that everybody was kept apprised of the various changes. And as a group, we tackled it, and I'm quite proud of how the group managed together. And the clients, have given great feedback, because lots of businesses immediately started seeing the impact, and they needed help. So that's what we're here for. We're here to help clients, and we continue to do that.
Did you see a discrepancy between, let's say, a organization with 150 employees as opposed to 50? Because the thing, especially when it comes to legal support, is that there is a cost to it. And a
Mhm.
company that's got 150 employees, of course, they could more easily afford to have lawyers on retainers. And now a company, essentially through no fault of their own, other than perhaps maybe not planning properly in 2020, they've got 50 employees and all of a sudden they're needing all this legal support because they've got people spread all over the country. And I mean, there was still, like you said, there were still partners that were passing away or people that need to transition out or selling their company, or an investment company out of the US is coming to Canada. There's all these things still happen. Um, did you find, was it an extra strain on a company with 50 employees as opposed to the 150 plus employee companies?
Every situation is different, and we work with our clients to accommodate their needs. And it is truly unprecedented, this time that we all faced, and we all faced together. So um, yes, it is a strain, and the strain was different depending on the industry that the clients were in. But we certainly did our best to work with our clients, and it was amazing to get feedback from some business owners, particularly small business owners, writing notes after we managed to deal with some issues such as the death of some of the business partners, unfortunately, to say that they're very thankful for the partnership, really, with them to help save their business and address their issues. So um, every business is different, but we work together with our clients to make sure that the arrangement works.
The something I'm very interested to dive into today was you mentioned it already, contractual obligations, leasing issues. I mean, that was just I mean, there was, again, without naming names, but I mean, we probably all know of companies. Some of them had locations all across Canada.
That's right.
And I mean, all of a sudden that it's still the same shop, but it's under a different name and all kinds of stuff that you're seeing now, because I mean, just in the leasing, I mean, you must have been just inundated with that, both from the tenant perspective and the landlord perspective. I mean, companies at every size though were affected in that stream.
That's right. And as I mentioned earlier, contractual obligations, the terms of the lease does govern the arrangement and the agreement between the parties. But at the end of the day, where landlords were potentially finding themselves in a situation where there might not be other tenants, available to take over the space, or tenants were finding themselves in the situation where they were unable to meet obligations. Parties, had dialogues, and they work together, because ultimately the view we tried to take is it's in the best interest of both parties, right, to come up with a resolution. And so we helped our clients definitely navigate through those issues within the parameters of the lease, but also sometimes needing to come up with creative solutions. And there were agreements to defer some payments, which landlords accepted, and there were tenants who were able to do partial payments, and then certainly there was some government relief as well. So we helped our clients, and there were lots of questions around that, and we've got
Mhm.
a whole department that was very busy doing that.
Is there's a you've touched on now, and it's something that I'm very, of course, as a business owner, I'm very interested in, is there's what's on the paper, but then there's what the real world is sort of throwing at you.
Mhm.
And do you find, especially in these times, that that's a lot of times what your role was, is to sort of help both parties? I mean, you're obviously representing one, but you're essentially helping both parties through these situations that neither one of them have. We've all seen a version of it before, but not on sort of a global scale. So is that really what you're trying to do? Is trying to, in a way, get them off the paper and to a place of agreement?
That's right. I mean, even on the transactional side, we like to consider ourselves deal makers, right? And as a solicitor, my job often is to try to avoid disputes and try to implement solutions that will address future disputes. So it was that kind of role. Sometimes a client needs their lawyer to step in and have that, write a letter or have a phone call and have a discussion with the other side and the lawyer on the other side, and negotiate an arrangement. And certainly that happened.
There are people that are listening to you right now that are just feverishly taking notes. Um, um, so I wanted to get into, actually, before, there's a couple things I want to talk about, like the takeovers, and there was something that you brought up outside of this conversation, which was like internal management buyouts, which I just found absolutely fascinating. Hopefully the audience will as well. But there's something that I sort of wonder. So in my day to day, when I'm doing this interview, it's 95% of it is a pleasant experience. Every now and then, someone doesn't like the picture that we use of them. Maybe we got an edit wrong, or there's a sound issue, so we essentially have to reshoot the whole thing. There's challenges. It's any business, but 95% is a pleasant experience. In your position, a lot of times people are they're in a bad situation, trying to avoid a bad situation, or they're trying to come out ahead in a bad situation. So it's kind of all centered around these things, not all the time, of course. Um, but I'm just curious, and I wouldn't say as a lawyer, but as an individual, because obviously every lawyer feels differently about it. Where does it sort of, do you enjoy going in, the meeting's coming at 10 o'clock and the person is not happy on the other end, and not necessarily directed at you, but just with the situation that they're in, like a lease agreement, they've signed a 5-year lease. Now their doors are closed, and, there's all these stuff that goes in. They're just not a happy person.
Mhm.
How do you sort of, approach that? You get up in the morning and you're going into a meeting knowing that's coming.
Yeah. Well, first of all, like I said, I am in this profession to help my clients, and I recognize that even though I'm a corporate lawyer and I work with business owners, and we hear the word business a lot, we can't lose sight of the human element, right? And so these businesses are owned by real people like you and I, and they put a lot into it on a day-to-day basis. And they're in the business of running their business. I'm in the business of providing legal advice. So I like to always keep that in mind. Even if somebody is really stressed out, they're coming to me for help, because I am and most likely going to be able to offer a solution that they couldn't have come up with on their own, because I'm a legal practitioner and they're not. So I like to keep that in mind always, and separate that. Don't take it the wrong way if somebody is stressed out, and just try to understand at a human level what they're going through. And it happens. There are business owners who have successfully run their businesses for decades, and on the day of closing, they get super emotional and they just don't want to proceed. That's happened. And so at that time, it's an emotional event. It's for many people, certain events such as business succession and selling their business is a once in a lifetime event. So we, definitely have to understand the emotion behind it, and work with that. So I just like to always, you know, uh, remember that, right? I mean, people are running businesses, people are exchanging information, and so just remembering the human side and working with privately owned businesses. I really enjoy doing it for that reason, because um, the clients that I work with care so much about the business. They care so much about their employees, and they're trying to find a solution. So I always like to keep that in mind, even if it's a heated, situation, or someone is stressed out.
That's an interesting approach, and there's a reason the reason I wanted to ask that, because I always, even when I've been in these high and I'm sitting there looking at the other person, I'm thinking they must just, like, I'm not enjoying this, but there's no way they are, but that sort of I sorry, something just popped up that I'm muted now. I don't think I am, but No, just some sort of little glitch. But yeah, I kind of wonder how they approach it. So I think the way that you laid it out is very interesting. You brought up something, internal management buyouts. I don't know if I'm doing the correct term or not for that, but um, these companies now, coming out of 2020, 2021, I know it's not a new thing, of course, management sort of essentially bailing out the company and taking ownership. Did you see more of that happening last year with companies sort of all of a sudden hitting a wall and then needing management to step in?
It's interesting. I did see a few examples of it, and it wasn't necessarily driven by companies hitting a wall and needing management to step in. It's an interesting, you know, uh, world that we live in, because we see all the motivations and we hear the motivations behind the decisions that business owners are making. So even though, I'll back up a little bit. There was a bit of a slowdown in the transactional market, and transactions were on hold, or on the flip side, some people, once they adjusted to what was happening, decided to move transactions up and they wanted to exit. And because there are so many different drivers of these transactions, it didn't really last throughout the whole year. So by summertime, transactions that were on hold started picking up, and many completed successfully by the end of 2020, not just to internal, employees or management, but certainly to third parties that they had been negotiating with before. And many businesses didn't even see a drop in their value. Of course, there's a lot there. It's dependent on industry. Of course, it's dependent on also the fact that interest rates are so low, and so a lot of strategic acquirers also stepped in. But the decision about management, buyouts, and for a seller to business owner to sell to management can be driven by just the fact that there's someone who's homegrown and has really given a lot to the business, and I've had clients want to transition their business to certain management employees who they feel will take the business in the right direction, and who are so intimately familiar with the business that they think that's the right choice. And it's not necessarily driven by necessity, that they don't have any other parties, but sometimes it's just a decision they've made. Sure, other times, because privately owned businesses, especially some smaller businesses, if they have found it hard to find a buyer, or a transaction hasn't gone through, management has stepped up and they've made an offer. So they've definitely entertained that. And in those scenarios, there are some things that come up. For example, because the prospective buyer is already intimately familiar with the business, it could reduce the due diligence phase, right? Which happens at the outset when a buyer is wanting to buy a business. So they already know a lot about the business, and there could be confidentiality concerns. For example, if it's a third party buyer coming in to examine a business, and getting a lot of information about employees, customers, etc. It's strongly recommended that a confidentiality agreement be in place. But despite that, if a third party is coming in, it creates different issues. So a lot of business owners feel if there is an offer from someone who's already on the inside, there's a little bit less risk, at least in terms of business secrets being, provided to a third party. Now, having said that, some management buyouts, they don't necessarily result in management outright buying the business and paying the full purchase price on closing. Many times, there are challenges in terms of coming up with the full purchase price. So sometimes there is a deferred purchase price component, or a vendor financing component, whereby management might need some time to pay the purchase price. And in that case, we structure it as a staged buyout. and provide some incentive for management to essentially earn equity going forward by growing the business, and money generated and the growth in the business can then be used to help them, to buy an additional stake in the business. So there are lots of different strategies in terms of structuring them. But as you mentioned, yes, I have seen more of that of late. However, it's not necessarily only driven by the fact that there's nobody else out there.
Yeah, fair enough. Do these, what was I going to ask? I might have to come back to that because I actually, I forgot my question. It does happen. I'm sorry, Pratima.
All right.
um, what I was going to ask about is there's the term goodwill gets used a lot as when you're looking to transition out, sell your company, and that term I think tricky to all the parties involved, especially with you look at, you mentioned you work with companies that are 3 or 4 people. A lot of times, especially the smaller companies, they are very heavily reliant on a key figure within the organization. Um, oh, actually, I do remember what I was going to ask you, and I want to go back to it. I'm going to jump over the goodwill, but I do want to get this question in.
Sure.
Do um, when you're structuring these, like if it's an internal management buyout or any sort of buyout, vendor takebacks and these types of things, are you suggesting that, or do they come with it? Do they come saying what they want to do and then you're putting it together, or do you actually lay out these different options for them?
It could be every situation is different, of course, but also it depends on who we're acting for in that scenario, right? So if we're acting for the seller of a business and they have received, the business owner, and who is selling the business, and that owner has received an offer from management, which is structured in a certain way, we will certainly give our input in order to manage the risk, right? And to ensure that the owner who's selling ends up with good value and ends up with what they actually think they're ending up with. On the sell side, the last thing we would want is for the seller to think that they're going to end up with a certain purchase price. And because it's been staged over time, the payment is staged over time, and that they don't actually see, the rest of the payment in the future. So we will, when acting for the seller, make sure that we implement a plan to manage that risk and to put protections in the agreement to ensure that the owner ends up with what they think that that they're going to end up with. On the other hand, sometimes we're approached by someone who is interested in making such an offer to the business owner for whom they work. And in that case, we try to understand the situation of the buyer and work with them in terms of what it is they can afford to do, and what may be some ways in which they can propose a structure which may be, which may encourage the owner to actually entertain their offer. So really, it depends on which side we're acting for, and it's a risk management, risk allocation issue.
I'm sure you must have, though, over time, seen people that they're coming in and they're doing something they're wanting to do and not even knowing that they have an option.
That's
Right.
correct. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when we have the initial discussion, all the various options are definitely going to be discussed. Yeah, because most people aren't out there investing in too many businesses. There are some people, who are definitely serial entrepreneurs, and they're involved in a lot of businesses, but many business owners are not, and certainly many management level employees are not in the business of buying and selling businesses. So because of our experience and working on hundreds of transactions over the years, I'm able to work with them in terms of proposing a structure that works.
Yeah, it's if I wish I could be I wish I could like take like a year course for being an accountant and a lawyer. I wish. Going back to the Goodwill, the Goodwill, I won't say an issue. Sometimes it's not an issue, but when it is, that must be when you talk about dealing with sort of the even the emotional side, because people put years, sometimes years and years into building, or even just 5 really hard years into building a company that's sort of built around them. Um, that well, I guess the first question I would have was, have you seen that where how common is it to see that someone's putting a goodwill evaluation, essentially they're on their way out, assuming someone else can do what they have spent 30 years learning how to do? Is that something you run into quite a bit?
So, just speaking of goodwill, there is obviously the accounting and aspect of it in terms of allocating value for
Mm,
the business to goodwill, of a business if a transaction is structured in a certain way. So I won't speak to that.
mm,
But, just generally speaking, this concept of goodwill, if we define it to be, what's the value that an outsider places on the business, and where really, where are they placing the value? Are they placing the value um, uh, of the business based on um, goodwill that's been generated because of the name of the business, the family name, the business owner? When you look at it in those terms, yes, we run into it quite often where some businesses have a reputation and goodwill around the person who has, run the business for a very long time. And buyers are interested in preserving that. So the goodwill can sometimes be associated with the name itself. So sometimes it might be a family name. So that is something we turn our minds to in terms of structuring the deal. Like, does that stay when a new buyer, takes over the business? Because that's what the outside world associates with the business. Many times it also comes up where someone is very much interested in keeping the person who is so fundamental to running the operations and running the business for a period of time after closing, by way of a transitional services agreement or a consulting arrangement, so that they can, more smoothly transition the business to the new owner by making introductions to customers, helping with, the employees of the business, because, there might be hundreds of employees, and they're used to dealing with that particular business owner, and there's a certain culture, associated with the business. So
yeah.
it becomes very important for that business owner to stay on after a period of time. Now, when acting for business owners who are selling, I, very clearly advise them not to let someone into their business and start running their business before they own it, before they have actually paid for it, right? So, what I mean by that is quite often, a buyer might be interested in buying a business, and they will ask to have conversations with employees, have conversations with customers. And it's a very risky proposition, because when once somebody comes in and starts to, one, know confidential information, and two, start to act like a business owner, the business owner starts to lose leverage, right, in terms of negotiating power, losing negotiating power because somebody else has already started acting as a business owner. And what if the transaction doesn't happen? So we don't want them to feel stuck, that they have to, negotiate a certain term a certain way because
Right.
the employees and customers are already thinking somebody new is owner. So because we advise against that, to preserve that goodwill, going back to what you were saying, it becomes essential in many circumstances for the business owner to stay on. It becomes tricky. Unfortunately, this has come up on more than two files recently, where the business owner ended up passing away because of unforeseen circumstance. It was completely unexpected, and that impacts the value. In one particular case, there was no succession plan in place, and the business just went to the estate of the business owner, and the family members who inherited it, didn't have the expertise or the desire to run it. So a prospective buyer who was on the table, to buy the business, very much interested in the business owner, as the person running the business, and very fundamentally important to the business, ended up offering a lower price. And so those challenges come up from time to time, and we're faced with having to negotiate for our clients and walk them through that.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff you're talking about is, I mean, there's probably anybody listening to this has seen the situation in some version or another. And it can be quite sad actually in some cases. The it, you talked at the beginning about the importance of planning, and it's something that's hard. From your side of the table, it's very clear how important it is to plan. What is, I think, a challenge is, our company, for instance, will look completely different a year from now if if we do well, it continues to evolve. And I think that is where businesses have, if let's say you're a manufacturing plant, you have a very consistent product, you have some sort of widget. There's some you can sort of build a structure out of that. But these companies that are very continuously evolving, maybe it's only a 5 or 10-year-old company.
Mhm.
It's tough to even know what to plan for. So where do you start if you're talking to someone who's like myself, and you're saying, okay, you need to start a succession plan and have shareholder structure in place and evaluate the company. And I mean,
Yeah.
where do you even start on that if you're a company that is in essentially growth mode?
Mhm. So, that's a great question, Jared. I think you start with the concept that I, mentioned earlier, which is take a legal audit, right, of your situation. Speak with an advisor, and if you and I were to talk about some legal issues and planning for the future, I would ask you, what do your corporate records and look like? Have you properly documented, who the shareholders are? Who are the shareholders, right? And are the shares properly issued? You will not believe, how many very successfully run businesses who have operated for decades um, didn't even have basic corporate records maintained over several years. Um, we ran into one situation where the chain of title was broken, and it was hard to even identify who the rightful owners and shareholders of the business were. And at some point, like, all these transfers happened, and the client had maintained their own records, or they moved around from different firms, and records were lost, so we had to go seek a court order. So, when you are starting out, I know it sounds like, it's well, because it's there's cost associated with it, and you don't know what you don't know. I think you start with just a discussion, and the advisor will ask you the right questions to draw that information out. If there are numerous shareholders, so 2 or more shareholders, um, absolutely essential to have consider a shareholders agreement. I would ask that question of business owners that have business partners, i.e., different shareholders in the company, and a shareholders agreement will give a roadmap. Quite often, these things get discussed, drafts get exchanged, and it never gets finalized or doesn't get signed by all the parties. And when you later run into a dispute, or a situation where shareholders can't get along, or directors of a company can't mutually agree on a decision, there can be a deadlock. And what is the way to resolve that? If there's a shareholder agreement in place, there will be corporate governance issues. There will be some provisions in there which would speak to who gets to appoint directors and nominate and nominate directors, and how are decisions made in the event of a deadlock. How are major decisions, strategic decisions about the business made? Does that involve all the shareholders to unanimously agree and approve it? A special majority of at least 2/3, to approve it? These are the types of things that'll go in the document. And also exit plans, right? And so you can, at the outset, when you are structuring the business, actually implement dispute resolution provisions in shareholders agreements and have an exit plan in place. If there are minority shareholders involved, for instance, in the shareholder agreement, to plan for the future, you could have drag along provisions or tag along provisions, which mean that if a majority shareholder ends up selling to another party in the future, then they have the right to drag the minority shareholder along in the sale, because a third party might not be interested in buying a business with another minority shareholder.
Right.
They might want to just buy all the shares, right? So that's a provision you want to make sure is in your agreement. On the flip side, a minority shareholder will want to ensure they have a tag along right. So if the majority doesn't drag them along, they have the ability to require them to do so, right?
Right.
So these are the types of questions when you start having these discussions. Have a discussion early on with an advisor, and you'll start to identify these issues, right? Because plan early, think about the future. What if there is a family law dispute, and if somebody has another shareholder in the company, and that shareholder goes through a separation or a divorce with their spouse, um, their business partner might not want to end up with someone's ex-spouse as a potential business owner. So a shareholders agreement would address that. And or what would happen in the event of a death of a shareholder. So these are the things that you start to think about. Will the estate get to require the company or the other shareholders to buy the shares of a deceased shareholder? Or will the company have that right, or will the other shareholders have the right, so that they don't end up with um, another shareholder in the company with whom they didn't actually start the business? So you start to think about the exit plan at the beginning, right? And if you haven't put it in place, then I say you start to have these discussions. And your assets, I alluded to this earlier. Your assets include your contracts, your tangible assets, your intangible assets like intellectual property, and your employees as well. So you start to think about, what if an employee leaves? What are the obligations? What if they start competing? Set up a competing business? Do I have protections in place to ensure that they don't steal my other employees when they go somewhere else to a competitor, or don't steal my customers? So you start to think about these issues, and then a legal advisor can help you document them in agreements, so that you don't find yourself in a situation as a business owner in the future where there's no written exit mechanism or dispute resolution mechanism.
As we close off this interview, I am curious, how often does a company come in, any size, and they are prepared? They've got it right. They've done all their succession, they've got their minority shareholders, all that worked out. They've got, a death of a partner, everything's lined up.
Yeah.
Evaluations are done. How often does that happen? Someone comes in and goes, "Here it is," and you go, "Yep, this is right. I just need to facilitate this now." Does it ever happen?
It's happened where we have helped, with the formation and expansion, certainly because you advise and you work with them over time. Um, and quite often with the right legal advice, yes, of course we see it. But more often than not, there are issues that need to be addressed. So there is always cleanup work to be done before a sale event can happen. And it could be any number of issues, right? It could be cleaning up who owns the shares. It could be cleaning up the corporate records, dealing with some dispute with a minority shareholder. And so whatever form that takes, I think I keep going back to the same thing. It rarely happens that everything is in order, but of course it happens, when companies have sought the right advice at the right time from all of their professional advisors. And it's just through dialogue and discussions that business owners can discover, even if they're not at that stage right now where there are issues to address. They can be. They can start to address them now, and in the future, when they go speak with someone, they'll say, "I've got my house in order. I have addressed these issues." So.
When I was prepping for this interview, I actually had the conscious thought that this show, if there's even one person that's running a company that takes something from this show and it saves them some of the headaches that I've seen happen, it's a show worth doing. Pratibha, I'm really glad you came on. I mean, it's there's so much that we cover on this show. I mean, last year we I've told the story 100 times. We started out completely promoting something else, and we went from a show a month to a show a week. In March, we're going up. We're already booked all the way into March. Now we're talking about going to 3 a week, and it's gotten really, really busy. But this side that you're talking about today is every single company at some point is going to have to deal with at least one or probably about 5 of the points that you brought up. So thank you for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it, because you need to come back, because we're kind of scratching the surface here. And even if it was once a year to have you come in and unpack these different challenges, I just think it would offer so much value to our.
I absolutely would love to do that. And, thank you so much, Jared, for the opportunities to be on the show and to just touch upon some of these issues, right? I mean, I deal with them day in and day out, and I absolutely love, helping our clients address them. Because like I said, business owners are in the business of running their businesses. And I'm, come across all these legal issues. So I'm very happy to have touched upon some of them. And I encourage anyone who is listening to, just pick up the phone or drop an email, and we can have a conversation, and figure it out together in terms of what might be required. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yes, and we'll of course have links and everything like that. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm going to do a quick sign out with Gowdy, but yes, I definitely hope to have you back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared.
Well, I see, talking to Pratibha, why I did not become a lawyer. No, like I said, we've known each other for a few years, so I knew there was lots of good information to be shared. I'm glad we finally got her on the show.
Yeah.
Gowdy,
Yes.
what did we learn today?
This is where the test, we have
Yeah.
an exam after the interview.
And it's not multi choice either.
No, it's not.
Where can people go to follow us, subscribe? We'll have a link to, obviously,
Yes, of course.
to contact Clark Wilson and
Yeah.
Pratibha and everything. But where can people go to suggest new guests as well? I know I said we're booked, but we always want more.
Of course. We're booked till March, but there's more months.
Yeah, there's 12.
Definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like Jared mentioned, we've got tons of episodes on there. We're doing 2 episodes a week currently and moving up to 3. So that will be quite exciting. Also, follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Crownsmen P. If you want to contact us, whether it's to be part of one of our shows, whether it's the Crownsmen Show, Mining Now, or Crownsmen Energy, or you'd like to, talk about a possible guest, definitely you can email us info@crownsmen.com.
And we're getting a lot more of those emails lately, I've noticed. They're
Yeah.
starting to trickle in.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, I will say this. If you want a marketing tip for the week, add that as a segment. LinkedIn, unbelievable how many people we've connected with on there. It's an unbelievable platform for businesses. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching the show. We'll see you on the next episode. We've got plenty more coming. And thank you again to Pratibha for joining us. We will see you on the next episode of The Crownsmen Show.